Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everybody. Definitely a hot topic, and it seems like every few days, and I'm not giving opinion here. These are just the facts. There's a new story or situation surrounding ICE. We're going to dig into the latest, some of the legal ramifications of that, and also how it affects, even on a state level, because there's lots of, even in the last 10 hours, more developments on the ICE front. She is a partner at Nossaman, a legal firm in New York City. Our friend, great to have her back. A professional of the year, What's Law Got to Do with It, is the title of this podcast. She is Carol Sigmond. Back on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Steve. How are you?
Intrigued to hear what you're going to share with us with all of these latest developments, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Even in the last few hours, military-grade weapons being brought to Minnesota by ICE agents. Again, I'm not taking any sides here. I'm just reporting what's going on here. A lot of Democrats demanding new ICE restrictions as another government shutdown looms. I don't even know where to begin because this is no pun intended, a moving target. Where do you think we should start? What's on your mind today with regards to ICE?
I think we should start with the Constitution of the United States.
Fair enough.
I always like to start with foundational documents.
Well, you can't dispute them. It's been etched in stone for quite some time. How does the Constitution play into the ICE situation?
So I think we should be very clear about one thing. Not all of this is ICE. Some of it is Border Patrol.
Fair enough.
And Mr. Pratt was killed by the Border Patrol, not ICE. Nonetheless, it's all basically federal agencies. So there are two provisions of the Constitution that are extremely important, and everyone needs to sort of understand what they are and then understand how they intersect, because we are in somewhat uncharted territory here. The first is the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. That basically says in the state and federal governments are in dispute on a matter that is committed to the federal government under the Constitution, the states have to defer. So when you have immigration laws and you have immigration proceedings, the federal government is king. It's on top of the state because immigration is a national federal issue and the states are not supposed to interfere. Now, there are limits on this doctrine. And one of the big limits is that it has to be a bona fide difference of opinion between the state and federal government. And obviously, the federal government can only act within the other authorities that it has. So merely because the Supremacy Clause exists doesn't mean the federal government can run rampant over the states or run rampant over anyone else. And so let's take one simple example in this area. We have Minnesota considers itself a sanctuary state. And this is something the federal government, the current iteration of the federal government is objecting to. Now, what does it mean to be a sanctuary state? People think it means you can defy the immigration authorities, you don't cooperate with them, you don't coordinate with them. That's only partly true. What normally goes on in the sanctuary situation, and it's true in all the states that I'm aware of, it is a limitation on the authority of the state agencies to cooperate with federal agencies in connection with immigration when they are dealing with what are called administrative warrants. That is to say, warrants issued by the agency itself. If there are judicial warrants, that is a warrant issued by a judge, it is a different set of facts. And then the Supremacy Clause governs and the states cooperate. So if you go to a jail right now in New York City, which is a sanctuary city, and you register as the federal government a warrant issued by a judge against someone who's currently incarcerated, that warrant will be honored. If it's an administrative warrant, that is to say, not issued by a judge, but issued by an agent, an ICE agent or a Border Patrol agent, it will not be honored. In most cases, it won't be honored. So it's very important to understand there's this distinction in sanctuary cities, and they do cooperate to a degree, but only when they are dealing with judicial orders, not administrative orders. So let's set that off to the side. That's been ruled on repeatedly by the courts, that states can insist on judicial warrants before they cooperate. Now, so there's some limits on the supremacy clause in that regard. The 10th Amendment is not particularly studied often. We don't talk about it the same way we do about the first or the second or the fourth or the fifth. But it's very important in this context because this is where the founders said, if we didn't give the authority to the federal government, the state governments retain it. It is a state authority. And let's take a typical situation in which both federal and state authorities have some interest in, say, a shooting. Let's say someone's killed. Let's not say by whom. Let's just say someone's killed. Mm-hmm. Typically, the federal authorities, even if they are immensely interested in this killing or whatever interest they have, they defer to the state homicide, the state authorized homicide investigators, because homicide is a state crime, not a federal crime. It is therefore, in effect, a reserved power to the states. The only federal homicide statutes are very specific. They're either terrorism or something of that nature, killing the president or something of that nature. It is not there is no general federal homicide statute. General homicide statutes are all state laws. So we have this reserved power to the states, which has only been well developed in one area. And that area is interesting in this context because it's related to, but not directly in line with what's happening here. It's only in connection with, or it's most developed in connection with, attempts by the federal government to use the state as an arm of the federal government. That they cannot do. To the extent that the federal government is trying to use the police or other public officials in Minnesota as an arm of the federal government, that's prohibited by the 10th Amendment. That is not the argument Minnesota is making. So you have on the one hand the supremacy clause, and then you have on the other hand this 10th Amendment issue. What the state of Minnesota is arguing is that they have the primary responsibility for policing. They have the primary responsibility for providing library services. They have the responsibility for providing parks and recreation, schooling, all of these services. And they are saying that all of this is being disrupted by the federal government in a way that is impinging on the state's authority. Now that's the kind of the basic 10th Amendment dispute. And then we have this supremacy clause question. Now let's dig into the issue that everyone is talking about, which is the, I don't know any other way to say it, the murder of Andrew Pratt. There is a horrible, truly horrible, slow motion video available on the internet. It was made by some very intelligent filmmaker, which highlights Pratt's hands during this entire incident. And what it shows is that he is holding a phone in one hand. His other hand is not doing anything. He's holding a phone. He's trying to protect a woman who seems to have gotten pushed. All he's doing is holding the phone. And the border agents jump on him. And they beat him. They beat him to the ground. One of them finds his lawfully concealed weapon and screams gun, but his hand is nowhere near the gun. His hand is still holding the camera, the phone camera. Then the agent who takes the gun, apparently, and this is the height of insanity, doesn't check to make sure that the safety is on, and it discharges. And this, of course, becomes an excuse for two men to put two shots into this man who is on the ground, immobile, unarmed, not doing anything.
And did not discharge the weapon.
And did not discharge the weapon, and they kill him. And then that is followed by a total of 10 shots. Now, that's what the video shows. The New York Times shows that in their reconstruction. This video maker shows it on his. It is frightening. Because essentially what you have is a group of federal agents who beat a guy into submission, disarm him, and then shoot him in cold blood.
Because the weapon accidentally discharged.
In somebody else's hands.
A law enforcement individual?
Who
And
should have
again,
had
yeah,
safety
we're
on.
just stating facts here. This is a video you
These are the
saw.
facts. These are just the facts.
This is Time.com reconstructed it, as did other media outlets. And I know there's also AI and games can be played here and there. But it appears that a lot of the material out there is corroborating with the same story.
So now here comes the question. Can the state charge one or more of these officers with homicide? Without getting into the details of which officer you would charge with what element of the crime, let's just talk about this. Because remember, we have the 10th Amendment over here, powers reserved to the state. We have the Supremacy Clause over here. Now, this is not a novel issue. It has arisen from time to time in the past. And the Supreme Court and the courts have spoken to the question of charging federal officers with state crimes. There are certain instances where a federal officer, in the execution of his duties as a federal officer, has absolute immunity. Consider, if you will, certain events in the South when civil rights, federal officers were trying to enforce civil rights statutes, and the states would say, you're violating our state law on segregation. That would not fly. Federal officer had immunity. He was executing his federal authority. He was doing so in a reasonable manner, and he's got immunity. Similarly, you can't arrest an IRS agent for going on property to serve an IRS notice. He is in the exercise of his lawful duties. He is performing lawfully. He's tacking the notice up or handing the notice, whatever he's doing in that modified setting.
So I'm going to look at that situation for just a moment. And I got you. I hear you loud and clear. What if there was a sign that said no trespassing, and that IRS agent walked on the property and walked up to the mailbox to drop the IRS notice in the mailbox?
It will not affect. He's in the proper discharge of his IRS functions, and he is doing so within the scope of his duties. Now, we have Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, maintaining that the officers involved in the shooting of Mr. Pratt were in the discharge of their lawful duties. There is a significant dispute about that, as to whether or not they were actually discharging their duties in a lawful manner. There is a large body of information, studies, expert opinions, serious students of law enforcement who have looked at crowd control and in many contexts. And there are some general rules of thumb in crowd control. You, generally speaking, try to keep officers aligned. You try to keep them with their backs protected. And you use, the term is overwhelming force, although that's not the greatest term, that's what they call it. And the idea is to use your presence to control a crowd, not clubs. That's why you use defensive weapons. They often have shields. And they'll move behind their shields, because the objective is to control the crowd with a large number of officers acting in unison under the direction of a supervisor. And there are techniques for safely arresting people, even if they're resisting. And it generally involves 3 people in a coordinated takedown of the subject that doesn't injure or harm the subject. And we need go no further than Minneapolis and George Floyd to know that if you deviate from that kind of standard, if you're a state police officer, you can be charged criminally. So there are very good techniques. They are taught in the police departments. For many years, the Justice Department advocated for these kinds of techniques because they avoided loss of life, they avoided physical injury, and they were the least intrusive, least aggressive way to manage the situation. Experts in the area have been looking at the situation in Minneapolis, including the shooting of Mr. Pratt, but just in general. They are seeing disorganization among the officers. They're seeing poor training. They're not coordinating. The failure to make sure the safety was on that weapon is one of their points.
Basic training.
Basic training. So you have a group of people who have been put out in a very stressful situation because they're not doing something that's particularly popular. They are doing so possibly understaffed and undermanned in one regard because they're trying to do too much with too few. They're not particularly well trained. They're not working in coordination. And they aren't using common sense. I mean, no one can see a person who is down on the ground when you can see their hands and they don't have a weapon and they have been beaten, because this man had been beaten. That man is not a threat. He is simply not a threat. And putting 2 bullets in him, followed by a bunch of other people discharging weapons to a total of 10, as I understand it, that is not reasonable use of force.
I wonder, Carol, a taser. Why wouldn't that be used? I'm just wondering.
I don't know. So that's the situation you have. I think it is my opinion, only my opinion, the state can charge certainly the 2 men who fired their weapons initially into Mr. Pratt when he was on the ground. I believe they can be charged with homicide. And I think the federal government will come in and try to remove the prosecution to federal court, which is one of the things they're entitled to do. And they will try to assert federal immunity for these officers. It is not clear to me that claim of immunity will be successful. And the reason for that is I think you're going to have a serious challenge as to whether or not it is ever within the scope of employment of a federal employee to kill someone. The Constitution says we're supposed to be secure in our persons and our property. I don't think you can take essentially a person who has been beaten and poses no threat and shoot him and maintain that you are in the scope of federal law enforcement. I don't believe the experts are going to buy that. I am not at all convinced a jury will buy it, and I'm very interested to see what a federal judge will do with that in light of the fact that they have allowed some of these prosecutions to go forward in the past.
And with the time we have left, looking at the repercussions or the aftermath of it, now there's reports that ICE agents are bringing military-grade weapons to Minnesota. Weapons of war. Close range. I don't want to use the word killing, but designed for close range combat, if you will. That's alarming for many. And
yes,
the perception, I believe, of many of the public is this has turned into the Wild West, where whatever's going to happen is going to happen. You know, if agents are deployed because they think that they need to remove individuals under the guidelines of ICE, are these targeted individuals, like you said, with warrants, or are they just going into neighborhoods and somebody who is profiled to look a certain way? Take him off the street. While we're here, get that one too.
Well, there is a decision written by a judge in Minneapolis. He was quite outraged because he he was reciting however many of these cases he'd had of people of color who were U.S. citizens who had been grabbed off the street by ICE. And this judge wrote a very blistering 6 pages, which he said, this has got to stop, in effect. I don't know in detail what instructions these agents have been given. I can only read the decisions from these judges. I can only read the affidavits that Minnesota has submitted in its litigation against the federal government under the 10th Amendment. And it appears to me that there are many people being stopped, held, who are U.S. citizens. That does not suggest that they are operating with judicial warrants. The President of the United States has indicated repeatedly that he would like to invoke the Insurrection Act, and he may be attempting to provoke an insurrection in Minneapolis. I leave it to the people of Minneapolis to think this through and how they want to handle this. But there is one other factor that's in this picture, which may seriously undermine the federal position at some later date. And that is a letter from Kristi Noem to Governor Walz, saying that they'll leave, that they've flooded Minnesota with all of these officers and taking all these actions because they want the state to give up its sanctuary status, which they can't require because of the limitations I've explained earlier. And secondly, they want access to voter rolls that they're not entitled to.
Got about 30 seconds left. Want to ask this question because it is in the last literally few hours that Senate Democrats are saying that they're going to block a massive government funding package, i.e. another potential government shutdown, because of this situation in Minneapolis. They're demanding new restrictions on ICE. What do you think's going to happen there?
That's interesting. I think that if Chuck Schumer is being consistent with what I think has been the underlying theme of his activities over the last year or so, he will hold the line on this, and he will hold his coalition together for as long as possible. And that is because Schumer seems to be intent on forcing a judicial process forward, and he is trying to give the American people information and an understanding of what's happened. So he makes an initial decision the first time there was a potential shutdown to keep the government open, and in my personal opinion did so in order to keep the courts functioning. After the courts were underway and clearly had a handle on the situation, then he was willing to risk a shutdown over healthcare. Now he has the courts once again in a major confrontation with the administration over what amounts to the future of the American democracy. I believe that he will hold the line for as long as possible because I think that Chuck Schumer, whatever your criticisms may be, is a man who believes in the Constitution and will do whatever he can to protect it. We're
out of time. I would love to keep going here. I mean, there's so many different angles, and I truly appreciate your insight. And in many ways, impartialness. We're stating the facts here. You gave one opinion, but aside from that, this is what's being presented. Let's process that, dissect it, see what we have, look at the Constitution. How can we connect with you, Carol? You're in New York City. Somebody's got a question, a comment. What's the best way to reach you?
Email. My email address is Sigmond, CSIGMOND, @Nossaman, NOSSMAN.com.
Always great talking with you. Also, instant feedback, steve@gmail.com. Feel free to keep it anonymous. That's okay, too. We'd love to hear what's on your mind based on this topic, which is changing by the moment. And can you come back soon to update everything?
Yes, I'll come back soon, and maybe the Supreme Court will decide the tariff case. We've talked about that at length, too. Thank you. I really appreciate it, Carol. Thank you. Be well.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Let's go inside the mind of a 10-year-old.
I should have worn those earrings today. I like those earrings. Gabby has those awesome earrings. I need to ask her where she got those, but that's just what she would want me to do. I'll have Michaela ask her for me.
Buckle up, Sarah.
Yeah, but then Michaela will be like, why don't you just ask her yourself? That's just like Michaela.
Sarah, buckle up.
Michaela's such a great name. I wish I was called Michaela. There's like a dozen Sarahs in my class.
Hey, we're not hitting the road until you buckle up, honey.
Oh yeah, seatbelt. I forget sometimes because my brain is like busy, you know? I wonder if there's pizza at school today.
Sometimes it can be tough to get through to your kids, but it's not impossible. Always make sure they're wearing their seatbelts, even on short drives. Remember, you have the keys, you have the power. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. Visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup for more information.